Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota. Happy Wednesday to you. And if you're a Met fan, this is feeling, you're going to feel a little punch drunk. This is definitely a blow if you're feeling like 2023 was going to be the Mets season. Obviously, you weren't paying attention the last 3 months, but this was something that was long coming and finally happened. The Mets completed their fire sale. They dealt away, as we had talked about last time, Max Scherzer. They would follow that up with, prior to Max Scherzer, the David Robertson deal. But following that, we saw a pretty epic dumping of salaries and players across the Mets roster as they, one by one, dismantled the 2023 team so that much of the pitching rotation is gone. We are left with a team that's remarkably different looking. One that lost last night to the Kansas City Royals in pretty disappointing fashion when they had multiple opportunities to win the game. However, there were multiple blown saves by the new look bullpen of the New York Mets. But let's start with the Justin Verlander trade, which was, as I said before, a long time coming. You're allowed to have mixed feelings on this one. This wasn't like Max Scherzer, who has been decidedly bad this season. There's really no way you can kind of sugarcoat it. Scherzer's been pretty terrible. Verlander started off pretty bad, but has actually come along in recent starts. Over his last 7 starts, he has a sub-2 ERA. He's looked much more comfortable on the mound. I think he potentially could have turned it around in the second half and actually could have kept it going and maybe even have started to look like a worthwhile investment for the New York Mets, particularly because they had the following year to make a trade on Verlander's contract to keep him on the team and potentially keep some semblance of an ace on the staff. But he is traded away back to the Houston Astros, back to where he once came from. It's got to feel like a real bouncing act for the Verlander family, who just left Houston to settle in New York, and now we're going right back to Houston. So it's definitely something of a culture shock for them. But the trade arguably worked out well for both teams. The Astros get a primetime pitcher, as we said before. He was pitching for the Astros previously and won a Cy Young last time. And even if his season's been a little uneven, they're still acquiring a worthwhile pitcher, I believe. In the Mets' case, they come away with a good haul, really a somewhat surprising haul, you could say, in terms of the Verlander trade. But they come away with 2 primetime prospects in the trade. So let's talk about them. So the trade would deal the Mets outfield prospect Drew Gilbert, as well as a fellow outfield prospect Ryan Clifford. So the 2 prospects were rated 1 and I believe 4. I think that's right, in the Astros system. So these were not chump prospects. This wasn't like the trade, like some other trades that the Mets made recently. This was acquiring 2 considered good prospects, particularly Drew Gilbert, who is considered, obviously the number 1 prospect in the Houston Astros farm system, but also one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. The consensus is that Gilbert's probably going to be ranked somewhere in the 30 to 40 range by next season, and potentially could be playing at the major league level, maybe in 2024, maybe even 2025. Depends on when exactly he comes in, but. By all accounts, Gilbert's is going to be a major league starter. I think that's pretty much a consensus. And honestly, the Mets do not have a ton of outfield depth in their farm system, so this was 2 worthwhile acquisitions for Verlander, who was on a short-term contract. Certainly could have been potentially helpful for the Mets, but because they are not going to be sniffing the postseason this year, most likely, we can assume that having Verlander, I guess, felt like more of a luxury at that point, and they kind of, not doing a rebuild, but more of a sort of a soft rebrand, maybe you could say, just to kind of purge what clearly was not working this year and start anew in the offseason. Besides the Verlander trade, which I honestly I would grade this as probably a excellent trade for both teams, and well, it remains to be seen how Verlander is going to pitch once he gets back to Houston. If he is dealing with any lingering issues or anything going on there, if maybe he declines rapidly in the second half, in which case the Mets will come out looking like bandits. But let's also talk about the Canha trade. They would trade Canha, outfielder for the New York Mets, to the Milwaukee Brewers in exchange for pitching prospects. His name escapes me for the moment. I believe his name is... Sir, it is Justin Jarvis. I don't know why I wanted to say Justin Roberts. Justin Jarvis, who was the number 30 prospect in the Milwaukee Brewers farm system this season, which might sound low. He immediately jumped to like 13th in the Mets farm system, to give you an idea how little pitching depth the Mets have had in their farm system. What has been really ugly the last few years with the Mets, just because not a lot of pitchers and a lot of them dealing with injuries and stuff like that. So it's just been pretty tough to find anybody who was even remarkably mildly decent. And Jarvis has talent. I think there's some people will look at like the 30 ranking in a prospect system and be like, is this guy actually worth anything? Mark Canha was a rental. I mean, this was a guy on a short-term contract who likely was not going to be contributing to this team, and they were not going to pick up his option anyway next year. So, you know what? Go ahead and trade him, and I'm glad they came away with something else there in that case. They would also trade Dustin Leone and Tommy Pham. Tommy Pham going to the to the Arizona Diamondbacks in exchange for. I'm going to murder a lot of these names here. Julio Rodriguez? No. Jeremy. And then the Mets would trade Tommy Pham off to the Arizona Diamondbacks in exchange for prospect Jeremy Rodriguez, a teenager who's currently in the Dominican Winter League, the Dominican Fall League, and they are expecting Rodriguez to be this is a very raw deal, obviously with a teenager. He just turned 17, and acquiring him for Pham, who was on a 1-year deal, was having a good year, it should be said. Pham really surprised a lot of people with how good he was playing, but sell when you have a chance to sell him high, and obviously they got Pham out of there to potentially get something good out of it, and I think they maybe have. With teenage prospects, it's kind of a gamble, but they're assuming that this kid has something in the future and might be a worthwhile deal to exchange. I'm surprised the Diamondbacks would trade away somebody with, you really don't know what they're going to do in the future like that, but and they just signed him to a contract. But Diamondbacks clearly trying to push into the postseason as a wild card team, maybe even a division winner if they can play their cards right, but most likely a wild card team. So we have that there, and the Dominic Leone trade I'm not going to really go into, other than I'm surprised anyone wanted Dominic Leone, who's been pretty much terrible the entire year. But I'm glad the Mets got him out of there. They sent him off to the Los Angeles Angels and require Jeremiah Jackson, an infield prospect, who the Mets are now loaded on infield prospects. They've acquired like 6 shortstops in the last few days. Going back to the David Robertson deal, and along with Luis Angel Acuna, who they got for Max Scherzer, they're loaded. They got plenty of infield depth for the foreseeable future throughout their minor league system. And how many of these guys are going to stay with the team? How many of them are going to be used as trade bait for other players later on? Who knows? But the trade deadline came, and the Mets were certainly selling, and they made it abundantly clear. There were also rumors that they were going to trade Pete Alonso, that he might have been on the trade block, as long as other players that were under contract until 2024. Obviously, Justin Verlander was one of them, but another one that was in play was Jose Quintana. Quintana, we've seen make a couple starts at the major league since his return from his injury issue, but Alonso was the other one being floated as a potential trade option, given that Alonso is going to be a free agent after the 2024 season. And there's been, as of yet, no plans to re-sign him. Pete's been on a great stretch recently and just recently won National League Player of the Week for his performance last week. He's been hitting well again also in last night in the Royals game, hit another home run, bringing his total up to, I believe, 32 now. Check that. But he has been on a good stretch as of late, which is good because P really needed to kind of put that really rough go in the early July out of his mind there. So that was his 31st home run of the season, and he's been an important piece. I don't know really what to say about him other than the fact that trading Pete Alonso would have detrimentally affected the team's fan base. I mean, that cannot be without question. I mean, that is absolutely what would have happened, and there would have been a real turning on the team. So, with the recent purge of everybody, it got me thinking about the 1992 Mets, who are an infamous team in Met history. The 92 Mets were dubbed the worst team money could buy, and the reason for it was that the Mets made a series of acquisitions. Stop me if you've heard this before, if it sounds familiar, really. Made a number of acquisitions in the 1991-92 offseason to sort of make a short-term push to sort of fix everything that was going around with the Mets. They were coming off a bad 91 season. 1990, they had won 90 games, but had failed to make the postseason that year. No wild card that year. And the assumption from Mets management at that point was if we sign enough free agents, guys who are considered top-tier players at the position, we can make another postseason run, maybe even win a World Series again. And the acquisitions were largely terrible. Everything kind of worked out badly for the Mets that year. They were dealt problems with injuries and problems with team chemistry. There was a lot of locker room turmoil that year, and pretty much everything that happened went bad. There was obviously the rotation that they had. They'd acquired Brett Saberhagen, and they brought him into the 92 rotation along with a number of other prime players who they thought were going to potentially change the culture, and they did, but in a bad way. So that was, of course, the first signing of Bobby Bonilla, and they would also bring in Eddie Murray, Vince Coleman. I mentioned Brett Saberhagen, and these were decisions that were made in large part as mostly just a short-term fix, and everything turned out as badly as you would expect. And it led to a really unfortunate year for the Mets. They went 72-90 that year, finishing 18 games under 500 with the highest payroll in baseball. Interesting. Seems how everything's kind of cycled around again. At the time, the payroll was, this is very funny, 92, about 31 years ago. Was $45 million, and considering the Mets' payroll is about approximately $300 million more now, the stakes have been raised a little bit. Certainly, a dollar goes a lot more now than it did back then, but it's pretty shocking how cyclical nature baseball can be sometimes, just in terms of how everything worked out. And it's been a tough stretch. There's really no way you can really deny it. And if we are heading towards another 92 season, the one thing you can kind of take with it is that the Mets farm system gleaned a lot of excellent talent in the 90s coming off of this terrible season. They would discover Edgardo Alfonso, Ray Ordonez was signed out of Cuba. There was Todd Hundley, Benny Agbayani, like a tremendous amount of young talent was developed by the Mets during this period. Of course, the infamous Generation K. Let's not forget them. But it was a productive period and a fertile period in the Mets farm system. They came away with a lot of impressive young talent. And if that's the stretch that the Mets are about to go on, I'm all for it. I think that's probably the best thing for the organization in general. One thing is that Steve Cohen is definitely seeking to develop a contender, and while he probably saw a short-term solution and a fix to the Mets' championship woes by just opening up the checkbook and basically signing whatever he could in this latest offseason. He has a chance also not to just improve the team in terms of their full organizational depth by acquiring all these prospects, but with his financial resources, he can also go out and sign the right players in this time, not just the most expensive and the most highly sought after, but the players who fit in best for this team and can help the team not just short term, but also for a long term period. And there's going to be a lot of attention paid on Shohei Ohtani in this offseason. The Mets are certainly going to be vying for his services and acquiring him potentially, but I think a better thing to look forward to for the Mets fans is also hopefully this team coming into a better realization as to what exactly constitutes a winning team, not just an expensive team, but a winning team, and what they can actually develop and continue to develop and make this a good team, because this has clearly been a horrendous mistake this offseason. And what looked good on paper to a lot of people, not just the Mets, but a lot of industry standards were the expectation where the Mets were going to be one of the top teams in baseball. A lot of things changed. A lot of people were wrong this year. There's a lot of strange metrics, a lot of bad luck, you could say, a lot of good luck in some cases, but the Mets certainly got their share of bad luck. They had to kind of pay the price here. They dealt away a good amount of talent. They received a good amount of talent back, and it's now just a matter of time and the organizational intelligence to actually use these young talents that they've acquired.
Thank you for listening to the Mike Spence podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike Spence Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.